Yesterday's concert is a Flaming Handshake media production. A bone-chilling cold was setting in. The dark shade of night had overtaken the sky hours earlier and evaporated any warmth that had delighted the afternoon. No amount of layers could relieve the frigid burn of the sweeping winds that were descending on the farm like some kind of biblical plague. Some fans took to pounding dark liquors and party favors to warm their frostbitten extremities. Others took a more physical approach. Crashing like bowling pins, some claimed body heat as an excuse to slam into their fellow concertgoers. Red faces flushed with energized blood, sweat ran the course of their shoulder-length hair. One guy removed his shirt and howled to the night sky. Maybe they were onto something. Huddled between the masses, it was that rare occasion that I didn't mind standing so close to strangers. The closer I crept to the stage, the more dense the bodies. It wasn't about the view, girl. Just let me stand next to your fire. My spine rattled and my jaw quivered. This was more than a bout of shivers. This was nervous jitters. The tortuous icy blasts that whipped my body were just the start of my unease. I'd heard stories about these guys. Sure, they were legends, but there were other stories. Those that were far less endearing to a novice metalhead like myself. Years earlier, one heavy metal fan told me his experience seeing these guys. He spoke of crossing the threshold into the venue like a child describes a monster in the closet. With each step closer to the stage, his unease grew. His shoulders tightened, his gut squirmed, and he said he debated leaving the show before it even started. It was the same apprehension that you feel when somebody's following you in a dark alley. Something was wrong. Something was horribly wrong. It wasn't your normal heavy metal shenanigans. This was the unbridled presence of evil. Faux blood splatters slashed across the massive banner that hung at the front of the stage. Even murder scenes weren't this gory. The house lights were dim and smoke billowed from the corners of the crimson-stained rag. Was this the setup of a heavy metal concert, or an altar to the Dark Lord himself? He said of all his years at heavy metal concerts, this was the only time he felt the mass media heavy metal cliche of evil. Even after that concert, while exiting the venue to the street, a passerby asked, "Was Satan in attendance tonight?" This wasn't the only story, but like a veteran sharing the horrors of war, they all unraveled the same way. Now, here I am standing in a freezing cold field with a mob of metalheads, and it felt like any moment the ground could open up to the fiery depths of the abyss. My biggest fear was no longer being swept up in a mosh pit or losing an extremity to frostbite. I feared for my soul. Welcome concert goers, music fanatics, and thrash devils. My name is Lance Ingram, and in the season 1 finale of yesterday's concert, our jam journal takes us to October 11th, 2019. Grab your earplugs as we go to Bonnaroo Farm in Manchester, Tennessee for Slayer. Bright rays of sunshine burned against my face. A gentle breeze swept through the campgrounds carrying the soothing sounds of classic rock radio. Reclining deeper in my lawn chair, I basked in the warmth. All around me, campers squabbled over setting up their tents and organizing their campsites. Across from me, a pair of brothers from Atlanta. Their setup was simple: a small tent, 2 sleeping bags, and a cooler packed with beer. They cheersed their liquid breakfast, and it was back to talk of girls, work, and other things 20-something-year-olds talk about. My neighbors to the left were a rowdy bunch, 4 friends all in their 50s that argued like little old women. "What are you doing, man? Trying to set up your tent." I'd come to learn these guys met through unusual circumstances while on a ski trip in their youth. Nowadays, separated across the states with wives and families of their own, the 4 friends made it a point to annually reconvene for youthful revelry like the good old days. No. Finish your beer first. I'll take care of setting everything else up." They bickered until the camp was set up. Then there were shots. Large handles of whiskey, vodka, and rum were yanked from coolers. They fired up the grill, cranked some Def Leppard, and began hooting and hollering about the good old days. The ringleader motioned me over, and within seconds of learning my name, he put a drink in one hand and a burger in the other. These guys were all right. Exit 111 Festival, in its inaugural and sadly only year, was hosted at Great Stage Park, the annual site of the globally recognized festival Bonnaroo. For the entirety of Bonnaroo's existence, no other festival had taken place at the site. That giant slab of farmland was reserved for one event and one event alone. But after nearly 2 decades of success, it was time to try a different flavor on the farm. But even before fans stepped foot on the grounds for the Virgin Festival, Exit 111 was primed to be the yin to Bonnaroo's yang. Where Rue was the spiritual sister of the original Woodstock, Exit 111 was the devilish brother of the Rolling Stones' Altamont concert. Where Bonnaroo had made a name for itself with peace, love, and feel-good music like Jack Johnson, Fish, and the Lumineers, Exit 111 was mosh pits, headbanging, and crowd surfing to artists like Black Label Society, Gojira, Ghost, and Lamb of God. Despite weeks of unseasonable heat, the weekend of the October 11th, 12th, and 13th was marked by an icy wind that brought pouring rain and sub-freezing temps. But the weekend didn't start that way. No, that Friday afternoon was bliss. It was like a page ripped from the dream of every summer barbecue. Not a cloud in the sky, and the sun burned brightly. The breeze whipped through the campsite, bringing the smells of juicy meat simmering on grills. Laughter could be heard above the blaring radios from every corner of the grounds. The moment I began setting up camp early that Friday morning, heavy metal fans were already in party mode. Sleepy campers emerged from their tents, cranked their stereos, and slammed back a little hair of the dog. Slayer! The guttural scream ripped through the site. It was mating season in the campground. Slayer! Another response echoed back. It was like something out of National Geographic. The first dozen times were humorous, but it spread like a virus. Like counting the seconds after lightning strikes waiting for the thunder, the weekend's unofficial catchphrase was unavoidable. Various obscenities were coupled with the howl, and by mid-afternoon, it had become a war cry. Even the grill master at my new friend's tent had to get in on action. Let the burgers burn. He was being summoned to battle. Slayer! It didn't stay in the campgrounds either. The catchphrase caught new life inside the festival grounds. During every performance, not just Slayers, but every band at the festival, the war cries could be heard between songs. It was inescapable, and without failure, it received a reprising chorus regardless of artist or stage. Slayer! While standing at the urinal. Slayer! During Leonard Skinner's Friday night headlining set. Slayer! While ordering chicken tenders. Slayer! There was no denying who had owned the night. As a teenage metalhead, I was introduced to Slayer in the back row of a high school independent study class with Ray, my friend and fellow metalhead. Dude, you gotta hear this riff. It's so heavy. I passed him an earbud to my iPod and pushed play. The song was Megadeth's Take No Prisoners from the Rust in Peace album. My long hair bounced and blurred my vision to the breakneck guitar shred. I was floored by the pounding in-your-face attack of the music. Megadeth was child's play to Ray, though. He was a real metalhead. So he let me have my moment before plugging in his iPod. Listen to this. From the speakers burst a blitzkrieg of misery and wretched clamoring. It stirred a caveman response in me. My body told me to run the room, thrash a desk, and draw a pentagram on the dry erase board. The brutality was unrelenting. It was the heaviest thing I'd ever heard. What is this? Ray just smiled. It's Slayer. For more than 35 years, Slayer reigned as the Dark King of heavy metal. They sold out stadiums, headlined festivals, and toured the world. Despite being a member of the Big Four of thrash metal, a category that also includes Metallica, Megadeth, and Anthrax, Slayer has always been in a class of their own. Where Metallica and Megadeth pumped the brutality brakes after some commercial success in the 90s, Slayer remained true to the maniacal and unholy gore of their heavy metal roots. If their music wasn't enough to frighten unsuspecting fans, the mythic stories of war-torn concert halls was. After hearing about Satan's attendance from my friend, anything less than ghouls and goblins running amok as hell incarnate took hold of the venue, well, it might as well have been a Hannah Montana concert. The show at Exit 111 was part of the final campaign, and although the commanding phrase sounded more like a piece of Nazi propaganda, Slayer was embarking on their farewell tour, and this was my final chance to see if the stories were true. The crowd of around 20,000 fans impatiently waited as the darkness choked out any of the residual heat from that beautiful afternoon. It was like every horror movie. Shots of beautiful days spent picnicking with loved ones in pastels. Then tragedy strikes. Horror unfolds. Paranoia told me this couldn't be anything other than a precursor for Hell's House Band to hit the stage. A blood-splattered tarp blocked the stage view. It swayed in the gust and watched over us like the eye of Sauron. A wailing guitar split the whistling wind and the crowd chatter. War cries erupted from the crowd and devil horns took to the sky. The band's logo flashed across the tarp before it dropped to the stage amidst a flash of pyrotechnics. Like Satan rising from the bowels of Hades, 4 figures emerged in the smoke and darkness, their strut large and proud like hunters returning from the big kill. Clad in black, head to toe, the 4 men stood like ancient warriors on the front lines. Their instruments hung low and heavy like archaic battle weapons. I was a nervous wreck in anticipation. Every beer can that cracked open sent me checking over my shoulders. According to legend, we were moments away from hell on earth. For years, all I heard was the pure, unadulterated evil that was the Slayer show. But if the former side of hippy-dippy love had suddenly been overrun with the living embodiment of darkness, I wasn't seeing it. There were no demons prowling the ground, no ghosts of Ronnie James Dio stalking concert goers. The only sensation running mine was the plummeting chill that I had inadequate for. But it was too early to be disappointed yet. The seance had barely begun. As the instrumental track Delusions of Savior faded from the speakers, the 4 barbarians launched into the ear-piercing thunderclap, Repentless. My ears pleaded for mercy. The entire weekend was an oral assault with decibels so unnecessarily loud, I wondered what hearing aid company was the sponsor. The decibels were obviously intended to slap the eardrums of fans into oblivion. This was beyond the old rock and roll cliche that if it's too loud, you're too old. It was war. Even with my earplugs, the relentless amplifiers felt like a contest to see who could do the most damage. By Sunday, the final day, my earplugs had become an extension of my flesh. But Slayer would not be outdone. No, not only would they start the fight, they'd also finish it. It was annihilation with one mission: lay waste to everything. Whatever other metal bands were doing to make their music heavier and more volatile than the competition, things like Cookie Monster vocals, eardrum demolition, down-tuned instruments, and everything short of black magic on stage, Slayer erased them to a bloody pulp. The hard-nosed clamor that exploded from their set was a perverse and unforgiving decibel violation. I winced at the brutal attack and wondered how anyone without protection wasn't running away in agony. On the count of 3, I want everyone to scream war, and I want you to hold it for a really long time, too. Tom Araya, bassist and lead singer, told the crowd during a brief intermission to the mauling. 1, 2, 3! The frontman joined the crowd's gravelly response. His scream continued over the drummer's 4-count cymbal ride. The vocal morphed from an abrasive rally to an eerie descent into the abyss. The band hit the stop-start intro of the combat-driven war ensemble. Rather than a plunge into the fiery depths like the tall tales led me to believe, the show was more like an aggressive beckoning to a firefight. Nothing about the show resembled the blasphemous dark arts that fans had recounted. The alleged ghastly violence that was on display so far was more akin to an 80s horror movie. Slightly unsettling, but hardly a dance with the devil. Slayer's music was infectious for riotous behavior. The down-tuned sludge of Payback felt like I was in a musical sparring match with Bruce Lee. The combative metal riffs left my head thrashing and entertaining the idea of throwing my body in the ring. By the time Born of Fire started, I was back shifting through the crowd, searching for the nearest mosh pit. Then common sense reminded me, hey, you were the one worried about bumping into Satan in the parking lot. Do you really think you have the stones to join a Slayer pit? Instead, I settled for throwing my body into a power squat, devil horns in the air, and letting my head bang like I was 15 again. Slipping away from the heat and the mayhem of a growing mosh pit, I moved next to a docile group of older fans. Sporting authentic 80s denim vests covered in their faded and stained patches of their favorite metal bands, these guys were old school. This wasn't their first rodeo. They sipped their beer and casually smirked at the show. But when Slayer's seminal underground classic, Raining Blood, ripped through the speakers, they were running circles and slamming their aged bodies into one another. They had flipped the Beavis switch. For a show hyped to such a horrifying experience, I saw a lot of joy. For many, this was perhaps the final time they'd ever see their favorite band live. For that, it was a reason to celebrate. Sure, your body will be broken and bruised tomorrow, but you'll never get another Slayer show after tonight. And even though I saw better performances over the weekend, Slayer was still the crowd favorite. The festival's war cry was exhaustively screamed in the remaining 2 days. It was my alarm clock the next morning, the chatter at breakfast, and yelled every time someone took a piss. Slayer! No matter the performance time of day, Slayer was always top of mind. Running a tight schedule, as soon as the final notes of Angel of Death defiled the audience, the road crew emerged from the shadows and began breaking down the band's gear. Arms wrapped around each other, the 4 heavy metal barbarians took center stage for a final bow. For 80 minutes, they led 20,000 metal fanatics through a bloodbath of crushing decibels at their alleged final festival performance ever. They had earned their curtain call. The band members waved to the crowd and slipped into the black from which they emerged. However, Tom Araya stood alone though. He wouldn't leave. He walked to the edge of the stage right, hands in pockets. He stood motionless. Blaring into the darkness, he didn't acknowledge waves or chants. Many fans had already left for other sets, but the faithful remained and continued cheering. Despite amps and kits already wheeled away, requests for one more song were still being shouted. Tom worked his way across the stage, savoring these final moments. Finally, after several minutes of him staring into the crowd, he requested a microphone. "I'm gonna miss you guys. Good night." Monday morning, I sat down at my desk job, lips chapped, body bruised, and still reeking of the weekend. I opened up my email and tried responding before leaning back in my chair. Culture shock was setting in. For 3 days, I lived like a barbarian. Now I was magically expected to return to a civilized society where peeing in a bottle wasn't an acceptable practice. You don't just throw a caged animal back into the wild. I needed time to readjust to not being surrounded by kind-hearted, music-loving fanatics. Somehow at the festival, normal wearing my skin-tight Van Halen leggings, but now my collared shirt grips my neck like a noose. Stepping outside to get some air, I realized how quiet normal life is. Where was the heavy metal thunder? Where were the mosh pits, crowd surfers? Why weren't my coworkers pouring shots at 7 a.m.? It was almost irritating how quiet things were. There was only one way to break the silence.
Slayer!
I'm Lance Ingram, and this is Yesterday's Concert. Thanks for tuning in to another episode. Sources and more info on today's show are available on our website, yesterdaysconcert.com. While you're there, connect with Yesterday's Concert, sign up for our e-newsletter, or jump over to Facebook or Instagram and give us a shout at Yesterday's Concert. And until next time, take care of your shoes.